All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Pastor Creighton, and I'm from New Song Church in Port Perry, Ontario. New Song Church exists to lift Jesus high in Port Perry as we worship, grow, and serve. And one important way we want to serve is to see families, children, and youth in our church and in our wider community grow and flourish. And you can learn more about us at newsongportperry.ca. So I want to welcome you to this live stream webinar called Parenting Teenagers in a Pandemic and Beyond. COVID-19 has impacted every part of our lives, including our family dynamics and the mental health of our teenagers. How do we respond to the challenges of this time, and how can that equip us for the future? Tonight, we'll explore a number of topics, including depression, anxiety, and fear in teenagers, as we navigate practical ways to lovingly partner and parent teenagers in these unprecedented times. I'd love to introduce our special guest this evening, Dr. Ken Wilgus. Dr. Ken is a licensed psychologist who specializes in the treatment of adolescents and their families, as well as couples therapy and individual therapy with adults. He maintains a private outpatient practice in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Ken is a sought-after speaker and regularly teaches on a wide range of topics relating to marriage, family, and faith. He's the author of Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, a complete guide to parenting adolescents and launching them into the world. And there's going to be a draw for one of 3 copies of this book later in the evening. He also hosts the Feeding the Mouth That Bites You podcasts. And for more info, you can check out drwilgus.com. How are you doing tonight, Ken?
I'm doing really well, Creighton. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's really good to have you join us.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Now, we first met when I was doing a youth ministry down in Plano, Texas. We were at the same church there, and you were regularly doing parenting seminars that made a huge impact on our parents and our wider youth ministry. It really, your ideas, your approach made a real impact on my own work with teenagers. So I'm just really delighted to have you join us in this way, Ken.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. So you're down in Dallas, you're down in Texas. We in Ontario, we're just coming out of our 3rd wave of COVID here. So we're just starting the slow and steady process of coming back online. What's your COVID experience been down in Texas there, Ken?
Well, Creighton, down here in Texas, we have guns, so we don't need masks and stuff. And, I don't know, it's gone pretty well. We are now really very much on the tail end, unless we have a resurgence. So down here, other than that, it is incredibly hot. We're not walking around with masks, and I have not heard of personal friends or people that know of people that have gotten COVID in several weeks, because for quite a long time before that, you always heard about people. So we're beginning to just come out of the from underneath the pressure. I think it's on its way up. We pray.
Right on. Yeah. Well, Ken, we've got a lot on the plate for tonight. We want to talk about the psychological impact of COVID, especially families, teenagers. But I guess before we dive into that, I'm just really interested to hear what got you into adolescent psychology? What drew you into this field? What do you enjoy about it?
I think I got into adolescence kicking and screaming. I had ended up with a master's degree in school psychology, and then went to the University of Texas for a degree to become a psychologist. And the social studies field is filled with quite a number of women. And so if there was a program with teenagers, there was a pretty high demand for a male to work in that program as well. So I can remember when I went, after I left University of Texas, went to Michael Reese Medical Center in Chicago, and I was committed to not be stuck with this adolescent thing. I get there and they're like, oh, by the way, about half your time is going to be in our intensive adolescent outpatient. So I'm like, and then as the Lord will do things, I was just discouraged. And after a few weeks there was just certain things that were being talked about that kind of clicked. And, the next thing you know, I actually liked it. So it wasn't my idea, but I'm glad I'm here.
Right on. Well, we're glad you're here too, Ken. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of what you're up to this evening, what the evening ahead looks like?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about this in three parts. And the first part, which I hope everyone's able to get in at the first part because it builds. I want to talk about almost what I consider an enlightening truth about understanding teenagers. And once you get that, then a whole lot of you can be much more effective as parents. Because then secondly, I want to talk about a lot of the impact of COVID, and more specifically, how to be more effective in getting teenagers involved and more compliant, how you can be more effective than because it's not the same as doing it with children. And then thirdly, I'd like to talk about more specific applied issues, taking those things that, especially as things as we begin to look past COVID, the issues of increased depression, anxiety, oh goodness, electronic devices. So just the things that come up in my office all the time. And certainly, way happy to answer any questions that people have. So we'll kind of go from the general to the COVID and then down to the really specifics, kind of feet on the ground kind of issues.
Sounds really good, Ken. And you mentioned there that you're happy to take questions. That's great. Just for folks who are at home tuning in, there are three ways you can submit questions for Dr. Ken there. You can use the live chat on the YouTube stream here. So go ahead and type in the live stream, and that's monitored. You can also message us if you want to listen something that's a little bit more private, not publicly viewed. Then you can send a private message to our Facebook page, New Song Church Port Perry, and you'll see us there. Shoot us a message, and or you can email families@newsongportperry.ca. That's families plural at newsongportperry.ca. And all three of those channels are being monitored there, so we can come around and maybe have some time for questions afterwards there. So Ken, again, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And maybe I'll hand it over to you at this point.
Okay. And let's look for a door prize if someone can ask a question that I have not been asked before.
Really
I've been doing this for 30 years and I love questions. I get questions all the time. So let's jump in because first of all, Zoom is so boring. So I'm really going to try to keep your attention. Bring your soda, your drink, your beer, whatever you need, and sit down because this first part, if you can stick with me for this first, let's just say 15 to 20 minutes, then I promise that there is a certain insight that can, in fact, make a huge difference in how you approach teenagers. And for many parents, it's been just a life-changing thing. You can look at some of the comments on the podcast. For other parents, for many of you, it'll be like, well, yeah, I don't know if I would have said it the same way he's saying it, but I get that. We're kind of already doing that. And then there may be a few of you that really object to what I'm suggesting, and you're the ones I really want to talk to because sometimes people get frightened by the concept. So here's the whole point. The whole thing that kind of goes from the book, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, is, and this is the first insight that you really need to think about. And so pay attention just for a second. We are now living in a culture in the West that does not know how to translate children into adulthood. And it is an odd thing because the way that we deal with our adolescents is unique throughout world history anywhere, because we are the first, actually about the third or fourth generation that has forgotten, and write this down, forgotten the important truth that childhood comes to its natural end by around 13 years old. I'm going to say that again for those of you that are dazed by that. Childhood comes to its natural end by about 13 years old. The reason that that's important to emphasize is that when we forget that, and in a post-industrial world, our 13-year-olds, no one even thinks about them as ready to be on their own. You're somewhere in your teenager's soul, they do know that they feel ready to be on their own. And we just wonder why they keep becoming maybe hard of hearing. I'm reminding him to clean his room just like I did when he was 5, but now he can't seem to hear me. There's just a lot of ways that teenagers respond and react and think, that if you don't take that reality that teenagers are not old children, teenagers are young adults, young, very inexperienced, very poor adults. And if you, the adjustment has as much to do with attitude as it does with kind of how you think about how you're going to approach them, and definitely think about what your end point is. So I want you to begin to think about your teenager as a young adult and not an old child. The most common parenting mistake that I see that parents make is to use childhood parenting techniques with children. And I can give you tons of examples, but I have parents that are of children that are teenagers of 15 and 16 years old that are still trying to motivate their kid in school by promising a pizza party at the end of the grading period. And they wonder why their teenager, who will take the pizza, by the way, is just annoyed by such patronizing kind of approaches. So keep in mind that your teenager is not an old child. They are a young adult. And if you can get that in your head and think about how you approach them that way, it can be hugely effective in your communication, in your limit setting, and so forth. So how you approach that then is to consider that what you need to do is to be prepared right now for, when am I going to be finished as a parent? Teenagers by 13 and 14, somewhere deep in their soul is the question, hey, I don't look like I did when I was a kid. I don't think like I did when I was a kid. I'm looking more and more like you. And as a parent, when will you say it's time for me to be completely an adult? When is it time for me to be respected and given my own freedom of choice for myself? And actually, I'm going to give you just a few seconds to think about your answer to that. No comparing notes, don't cheat. But think about, when do you say that your teenager will be an adult with the same rights and privileges that you have? Ready? Got it? Okay, I'm going to predict your answers. Most of us will answer in 3 different categories. The first one is age. A few of you, usually some dad, is out there going 18, 21, something that's like a set age point that you just feel like you're kind of done. The others of you that are more old-fashioned will say, my kid will be an adult when he or she can live on their own, when they can afford their own living. I call that the under my roof theory. And that is that once you're ready to go and live on your own, then until then, you're still my kid. And then the third, most of you that are very sensitive parents have the what I call the I know it when I see it category, which is some vague, when she shows us that she's ready to whatever. And it's certain characteristics that you're going to wait and see when they're ready. So here's the problem with the under my roof category. Number one, do you know, I do, more and more 20 and 30 somethings that are still in their parents' basement playing video games and are not on their own. As a matter of fact, they don't even seem motivated to get out and do on their own. And these parents are sort of stuck because we're waiting for this young adult to signal to me that they are an adult. And what if they never do that? It's also true with whatever your characteristic of I'll know it when I see it answer is. Don't you have some uncle so-and-so that he never showed that kind of characteristic, but he's 50, he's old. The point is that if we live in a time where we're waiting for our young people to tell us when they're done and ready to be an adult, more and more people are waiting a long time. In America, when we don't have an answer to something, we make a movie out of it. So when I was a kid, we had a movie called Rebel Without a Cause, which was an early sign of all this young adults that were wealthy post World War II and just aimless, and they didn't want to listen to their parents. Well, more recently, we have a movie called Failure to Launch, which is more clearly the kind of problem we're in now, which is you have adults that are clearly need to be on their own, and parents waiting around for them to signal that it's time for them to go. What you need to do is take into account the reality that if this is a young adult who wants to know when is it going to be time for me to handle my own life, then you let them know when that is. And when that is, virtually for all of you, is right after they're finished with high school. That is that when they are done with that part of schooling, then after that, you need to be ready for them to be pretty much making their own decisions about things. At that point, I call what you parents are as a benevolent bank. We're willing to support certain things and we'll be nice about it, but we're not going to pay for your weird, Zen school, but we will pay for welding school, things like that. But the key being is you can answer your teenager on a progressive level. Am I getting somewhere? Are you seeing that I'm old enough to make my own choices? And you do that in progressive steps that I call planned emancipation. And actually, someone said that probably should be the title of the book. Feeding the Mouth That Bites You sounds a bit like a cookbook, but it actually could be called planned emancipation. It is the process that you set in your house that is a rational set of freedoms, and not privilege, freedom, that you give over to this young adult so that you are answering their sort of spirit question. Hey, am I ever going to be seen by you as an adult? And you are answering progressively, yes, this is more and more up to you. And that's done in orderly steps. In my house, and by the way, I did all this stuff. You can't recommend all this to people if you didn't do it yourself. I have 3 adult children. They're all married. They actually like us. We talk. They're good kids. Now, I'm not going to kid you. They weren't difficult children anyway. So it's not like I'm doing this because I was an amazing parent. I wasn't. I was okay, but not great. The point is, we did this with our kids. In my house, on your 13th birthday, along with whatever gift that you got that probably was more than you deserved, you also got the freedom to keep your room however you want. That is, at this point, you keep your room clean or dirty. With freedom always comes responsibility. Here's the washer and the dryer. You can have food in your room as long as you can afford an exterminator. And since you can't, I'm going to fine you 50 cents or $1 or whatever for everything you keep in your room. Not because I'm trying to make you keep your room clean, but because your room is attached to my house. It brings bugs. You see what I'm saying? But you can also give the freedom to be friends with whoever you want to. Definitely now you need to give over the freedom that you can listen to whatever music that you feel between you and God is reasonable to listen to, as long as it's coming through your headphones. That, by the way, is an easy freedom to give, because just in case you don't know, if you have a 13-year-old, you are not controlling the music that they're listening to. Unless you're Amish, if they have an electronic device, they're listening to whatever. So the key is, if you want to be effective, then you hand that over and say, at your age, we recognize now that you need to use your own judgment in how you choose to handle that. So that's what planned emancipation looks like, all the way up to the day after you've graduated high school. In our house, you don't have a curfew anymore either. You can come home when you want, but not before that. It's just an orderly steps of giving over freedom. The goal of that is to answer this need for being an adult, which is virtually what almost all teenagers feel. And it's loony. A kid can be failing a class, a 16-year-old, and they don't know anything about how to get their grade up, except they do know that they don't want your help. I don't want you to ask. They will even say, parents come into my office and they're like, Dr. Wilgus, he lies. I asked him, do you have any homework? And he said no. But guess what? He did. And I don't even think he feels guilty about it. No, he doesn't feel guilty about it, because this young adult feels like you're in territory that's none of your business. You shouldn't be asking about this. It's my problem. Now, the thing that you want to, if you begin to answer certain things that we're leaving that up to you, then it makes it much easier for you to say no to the things that you still need to say no to. And there are still things that you need to say no to. But it makes it easier if there's at least other things that they're having their own freedom to do. It also, and this is critically important, if they believe you that you are for their freedom, you can communicate with your teenager. And this part comes up for so many parents, especially Christian parents that are trying very hard to influence and manage their teenager. Too often that approach actually creates a kind of an intense rebellion that pushes teenagers away. So by actually letting them know that for the things that you want freedom to do, the answer is either no or not yet. No, actually, the answer is either yes or not yet. There's no, because eventually you will grow up in this house and you don't have to get away. If they believe that, you can communicate in ways that you can't imagine. If a teenager has the freedom to choose their own friendships, then you can actually talk to your teenager about, hey, do you like this guy? It just seems like after you dropped out of sports, these guys don't seem to have as much time for you, and it's your choice, but I'm just curious, does that bother you? And for many of you parents, you haven't had a non-defensive answer from your teenager for months. Well, you can gain the kind of trust that says, I'm here in these areas as a peer, as an adult to adult, and I'm really just wanting to advise you about that. Because so many times our teenagers think we're a policeman. You know, you just go, hey, what's going on in here? Nothing. Everything's fine. And they don't even want to talk to you. So if you can give more and more over freedom, it helps a great deal in your communication, which is way more effective than trying to set limits on things that you have no control over. You can't, unless you're willing to hire a private investigator, you can't make sure that your teenager doesn't make friends that you don't like. You just won't be able to know. And so many parents in my office, really caring parents, look just a little silly when they'll tell me, oh, yeah, no, Dr. Wilgus, in our house, we don't allow music that has bad lyrics. And I kind of look over at the teenager and the teenager looks at me, and I'm not saying anything, but she and I both know that that ain't happening. And you're giving over the opportunity instead to be able to actually say, since it's up to you now, do you mind if I look at your playlist? What kind of stuff do you like? And can I just ask you, doesn't Kendrick Lamar on the way to church bother you just a tad? Do you feel you can actually have communication about that? But there will be, then lastly, there still is stuff that you'll say no to. And we'll touch on this a couple of times during this talk. One of the big ones for all of you, I know, is probably your electronic devices and social media. There's just no question that the data shows that they really need to be limited in their use of social media. And you're going to have to try to maintain some control over that as best you can, probably until their senior year. Again, everything will eventually go over to their own control, but it is worth trying to hold on to at least some limits. And I know, I get it. You'll wake up and go, wow, all of that, he's got his phone in his room all the time. I thought we had a rule that he had to put it down. Just go back and in there, let him know that, look, sorry, we've not been enforcing the rule. Here's the deal, and go back to those limits. Now, when you say no to something, remember this, you're not a policeman, you're a judge. If you're going to set a limit, a policeman has to basically, how do we make sure this crime doesn't get committed? Let's say that the rule is that you have to be in at 11 p.m. Well, if it's 11:02, the policeman probably has to go out and try to find them. Very ineffective with teenagers. The judge gets ready for bed and waits until they come in and issues the consequence for whatever that is. And judges can do it quite calmly and make sure you do it very effectively. Speech making does not work. I can't tell you how many times parents tell me, parents love to quote their own speeches. Don't you love your own speech? You can think about the thing. We're just so proud of it. On my podcast, Feeding Them Out That Bite You podcast, one of my favorite episodes is when I interview my own children. I have 3 adult married kids. And I asked them, I said, I always recommend to parents that they don't give speeches to their teenagers. Did I give speeches? And all 3 of my children said, yes, Daddy, you gave speeches. Okay. So then I'm like grasping for straws and I go, well, did at least Were they helpful? Were my speeches helpful to you? And my middle kid, the sweet girl, the good one, said, and I quote, "Daddy, I remember that you gave speeches. I don't remember anything you said in any of your speeches." I think it's important for you to remember that, because I will tell you they were good speeches. There was the "Do you want to work at McDonald's your whole life" speech, "Boys only want one thing" speech. These were good, and they don't remember them. So you do much better in communication to actually be very short in your words about the things that you're saying no to. You cannot go to that party. You cannot use your phone in your room after a certain time. And don't use a lot of words with that. It doesn't take a lot of words to say you're bringing it in late. You now you lost it to for an extra hour tomorrow. That doesn't take a lot. But on the free stuff, where they're free to make their own choices about, you should be able to have a lot more discussion. Like about school, I'm not micromanaging your school anymore. You have to keep your grades to a minimum, or there will be consequences, but I don't manage it. Then you can actually ask, "How's school going?" and really get an answer, like more than "fine," that defensive thing that you get all the time. So that's basically what you need to know in this first segment, if you've been paying attention. And I mean it. If you really consider that you may be part of a generation that is unusual in all of history, that has forgotten that childhood, it comes to its natural end by the age of about 13. And what you have in your house as a teenager is a young adult. And if you begin to answer their basic question of when will it be time for me to make my own choices, by giving over freedoms, that's what I call planned emancipation, and letting them know up front that we are for your eventual freedom. That's really key, because one of the things that will kill you in this process is fear. And I work a lot with Christian parents. Not all of you are Christian parents, I don't know. But for those of you that are, I have to remind you that fear, God will forgive us for fear, but it's not really something that we're supposed to be sort of dwelling in. We at least push back against it. Too often, fear masquerades as the more passionate and knowledgeable parent, that you're the one that says, no, I haven't looked into summer sports. And that one parent that's always the one going, "Oh, well, I was told if you didn't contact them, by March, then you're screwed." And you're like, "Oh, I'm a terrible parent." That's just fear. Our God has given us enough, and our assurance of his goodwill for us is Jesus. And so we should try very hard to push back against fear. I'll add one other thing about fear. Your teenagers are watching. If we do a lot of trying to teach our teenagers about our faith, then and you freak out because of the first bad grade that they bring home, they know it, they can see it, that your faith, your belief in God offers you no comfort. They can tell. So you really have to think about kind of how you're implementing these things, and that includes an upfront statement: "We are for your eventual freedom." And I can tell by how defensive you are when I say good morning that you're probably becoming an adult. And we get that, and we want to try to be for that, because there will come a point in this house that you're a complete adult. You do not have to get away. You can grow up here. So that's part one. And again, the podcast is free. You can look that up. The book has all that stuff out. I mean, goodness gracious, I've even put out, there's like a chart in here and everything. So it's all, if you need it, it's there. You'll win one with Creighton tonight. So it's all laid out. But the key is to start by flipping your understanding of this teenager. They're not old children, they're young adults. So now let me talk about coming out of COVID, and especially what we've all been going through, because there are unique aspects of teenagers that you probably already discovered can be uniquely frustrating and so annoying during times that we really need help. People have been sick. Has been fear of contagious, being exposed. People have died. And we get to a point of a kind of frustration sometimes with this incredibly ignorant teenager that just spent the whole time just wanting to get out and telling you that everybody else was getting out. How come I don't get to get out? All that stuff. So one of the aspects of what we just talked about that maybe I hope is helpful is that you can understand a little more of why it is more difficult for a teenager. An 8-year-old isn't going to enjoy quarantine, but a 15-year-old is a whole different issue. It's just annoying for you to be telling this young adult how they should handle stuff. And there are things you have to tell them, but there's nothing wrong with apologizing for it and saying, look, I know you think we're wrong about this, but at this point, this is what we're doing in this house and you have to do it. And there will be this consequence if you don't. But try to be aware that you can tell an 8-year-old your speech about COVID, and maybe he'll listen. Your 15-year-old, as I've already mentioned, won't listen. So you don't need to use a lot of words as far as lecturing and so forth, because they're very annoyed by what feels like a kind of patronizing disrespect, even though we're trying to protect these kids. But don't be surprised when your teenager does not rise up and call you blessed, and they don't really even thank you for this thing that you're doing, because they're young adults and they're seeking for, when can I make my own decisions about this? So that's important. The other thing for you to think about when you're coming out of COVID is you really need to take your own temperature. A lot of us are really struggling. We're at home. This Zoom thing, which, Zoom fatigue is real. I assume some of you know that. I thought it would be cool when we first started that I can sit at home and see patients from here. No, not good. And it really does kind of, over time, create a kind of pressure for all of us. Well, it's very important for us as parents to really be cautious and take stock in how you're feeling, the pressure you have, even depression that you may be feeling. And it's important to take care of yourself as best you can, so that you don't, in your limits and your dealing with your kids, that you're not dumping your own stress on them. So that's important that you use your relationships. Those of you that are married, do not neglect your marriage. It's critical that you be able to support each other through this. Those of you that are single, this is definitely the time to connect with your friends. By the way, dating is not a good way to overcome your loneliness. Your good friends, those that love you, that have your back, family, those are critical for you to be creative in spending time together, so that you're a bit more at peace and you're not overreacting to your kids. So then lastly, though, when you're dealing with teenagers through a time like this, you want to think about some other things that you might not do with children. Number one is that when there's doubts about is it time for us to go do this thing? Should we begin to do more of this activity that has been canceled? Think about inviting your teenager into that discussion. If you have children in your house and teenagers, then think about the effectiveness of occasionally saying, okay, we're going to have a family meeting just for the adults. So you, the 8-year-old and the 5-year-old, you guys go on, but I want to ask your sister, the 14-year-old and the 16-year-old and us to talk about, what do you guys think? And not as a little exercise, mean it, like ask for their input about what they think we might do as a family. Because the other thing is to look for creative things to do when you're not able to do other things. If you guys are still on a shutdown, certainly feel free to let your kids know. Don't be afraid to answer, I don't know, when they're talking about how much longer. Are you sure that we still have to do this? Because I was told that if you don't know, then tell your teenager, I don't know. Children can be made anxious by parents that are always saying, I don't know. Teenagers are made anxious by parents that pretend like they know the answers to everything. So there's nothing to be afraid of in telling them, I'm not sure, but then see if you can gain more consensus in your family by respecting that, hey, I want to know what you think. For a lot of your teenagers, you could ask them, would you research that for me? They're the web browser experts, not you. So ask them, would you mind going to look that up? Because I'm not even sure what the latest is on that, and ask them for help. Many of you, especially with older teenagers, need to get in the habit of genuinely asking your teenagers for help. Not help like take out the trash. That's a chore. There's nothing wrong with that. But help like moms asking their strong teenage son, would you please help me get the stuff out of the car? I need your help and you're so strong. Things that really show them that we need your input and your help is important to us as a family. Too often we, as parents, structure things that still sort of imply that even the input my children give, my teenagers and adults give, is all childhood kind of input. We don't need you. And that's just degrading. There are some things that if you're creative about it, think about what your teenagers are gifted at. Some of you are going to really need help in thinking about what else can we do besides go on screens? What are some creative things we can do as a family? Well, tap the resources of that creative teenager that you have and ask her, what were the games that you and your friends were doing? How do we do that here? And see if they can, incorporate their help in doing that. Again, it implies not only that you are an adult here, but it does show them the kind of respect that they're needing. And all of these things help a great deal in dealing with the pressure of COVID. I'm going to revisit the other part that happens with COVID, which is screens. Most of you have probably already kind of compromised on what you had hoped for with phones and video games and things like that. Well, I would start by being kind to yourself and don't shame yourself. All of us have overdone this. And that time or many times that you thought, I think he's been up there for 3 hours and I think I'm not going to say anything. We all forgive you. This has been tough. It's not great for them, but it's been hard for all of us. So it may be pretty soon time to revisit that with your teenagers, because with the electronics, screen time is something that, like I've already mentioned, it just creeps like a flood, and they push back on that more than anything. And you do have to try to hold firm with that. So you may need to have a talk as your COVID begins to lift, to be able to sit down and say, we've had to be pretty lax on this. And, you should include yourself in that talk. When we talk about the teenagers shouldn't have their screens in their bedroom, neither should you. The blue light from that screen, and you all do it. I know you do. Well, the blue light from that screen is not good for you. It will interfere with your sleep. And if you have a rule that you need to start putting your phones on the charger in the kitchen, then why don't you add yourself to that rule? Now, don't let your teenager force you into doing it, because we're not roomies, but it does help for them to hear that I'm not just lecturing to you, I'm talking to myself as well. And this has become too easy to just kind of turn my brain off and get into videos and things like that, and try to pull that back. You might even signal in advance that we're not going to do anything right now, but I can tell you that by the end of this month, we're going to start pulling back. And again, don't be shocked when your teenager is outraged. I mean, outraged that you are cutting off my social lifeline, all that kind of stuff. It is carries with it both. Teenagers don't like being told not to use stuff, but secondly, and I'm not going to overdo this because it'll only bring your fear, but there's an almost soft addictive quality to the kind of, especially social media, that teenagers are on. If you haven't had a chance yet, a really good documentary that has been out for a while now is called The Social Dilemma. And I would recommend that all of you, if you can, watch that and try to get your teenagers to watch it with you, because it is a very unusual documentary, because it is not only one that really clearly outlines the dangers of this kind of drawing you in kind of stuff, but the people teaching us this are the very people that created this stuff. These are Facebook, Google, YouTube executives, former, that are now regretting what they have created. And it's powerful. and is important for everyone to listen to. And again, not make your teenagers do it. You need to watch it as well. If you use a browser, if you ever look at YouTube, these are things that that will draw you in. And so watch it with your kids. But it would be a good time to kind of reconsider all that and try to help them see that. But in the long run, it's still going to come down to there's a limit. If you don't have your phone down by this time, there'll be a consequence. And, they're not going to like it, but at least you can try to be reasonable about it with them. But coming out of COVID will be important in trying to kind of help restart some of those things. So that brings us then to some of the other things that have been made worse during COVID. And we've already had some questions about anxiety and depression. I'm going to start with depression because it's very common for teenagers to be brought to my office. And they are, one of the reasons they're brought is because the parents say that they think this teenager is depressed. As you can imagine, teenagers rarely agree that they're depressed. They don't want anyone telling them what they are. But it may be helpful for you to know, here's what I'll ask a teenager. I'll say, do you think you're depressed? No. My mom always says that, but no. And I'll say, okay, let me ask you this. Do you ever feel kind of tired anger? Sort of like if I had the energy, I would be so ticked off, but never mind, just forget it. Kind of flat. And many teenagers will say, yeah, I feel that a lot. Yeah, okay, let me ask you this. Do you ever feel bored? And I don't mean this kind of bored, but I mean like, let's go, kind of like agitated. And they're like, yeah, I feel that a lot. And I'll tell teenagers that's what depression feels like. And it's important for you to know that adult chronic depression is often what we think of as that lying around in bed, can't get up, can't go to work. Now, teenagers can exhibit some of even to that degree, but most of the time it's a chronic, sour, flat loss of energy and interest in anything, and annoyed by everything and dropping interest even in friendships, activities, all that stuff. And that would not be unusual. I think probably a significant portion of your teenagers have at least a moderate amount of depression right now. I wouldn't panic about it, but that would be the thing to what it would look like if they are kind of flat and really kind of melancholy. I think it's important to talk to your teenager about it, but be pretty careful. Teenagers are going to be very touchy about you labeling what you think they are. If you have teenagers, you already know this. So there's a big difference between coming to a teenager and saying, your father and I think that you're depressed. You're going to get nowhere. Instead, you want to come at it more in terms of what I call advice giving. You want to start by owning it. I would start by saying, hey, can I talk to you about something that I am a bit worried about? And I may be wrong, but you seem to me pretty flat and not interested. Your friends called the other day and you didn't get online with them. And I'm concerned about how you're doing because it worries me to see you like this. And then you finish with, but I could be wrong. I was just curious if you thought that was true, or if there's anything for me to be, can you help me with my worry? You hear the difference. Advice giving is when you start by kind of minimizing what I'm about to tell you. It's just me. I did this with my kids all the time. I can't tell you how many times I started with, I'm a shrink, so I worry. And this is none of my business, and then I would throw in the thing that I'm asking about and then finish the statement with, but I'm probably wrong here. Can you just kind of tell me, is there any truth in that? And then see if it makes it easier for them to respond. But with depression, I would not rush off to a counselor or a therapist. The main thing to watch for is if they're really not doing the things they need to be doing. And that's becoming harder to tell during COVID because a lot of the normal things that you needed to get up and go do, like go to school, be able to participate in sports, those sort of things were all canceled. So it made it really hard to say, is this teenager unable to get up and do the things they need to do? Or is it just because they can't get out and do stuff? I suspect that in the next few weeks, even where you are, this will become clearer and clearer that there are things that they can go do and they may not want to do. That would be the kind of thing that it looks like depression. Many of you are going to worry about suicide, and you should know that suicide does not directly relate to depression on a direct line. In other words, you don't have depression, really bad depression, and then suicide. Suicide is a very different thing, and many teenagers can get to the point of feeling kind of hopeless, but that does not mean that they are suicidal. If you do hear things from your teenager that are worrisome, like, why do you care? I'm not even going to be around very much longer. You must ask your teenager and not be afraid to say, I'm sorry, are you telling me that you're thinking about hurting yourself or killing yourself? Many parents think I shouldn't say that because that will give them an idea. It doesn't. I've never had a teenager that wasn't suicidal, but after my mom said that, that really gave me the idea. That's not how it works. It takes the energy out of the thing if you're direct with them. And if you don't get a straight answer, then it is definitely time to contact a therapist, a psychologist, for an evaluation. But I would be cautious that there is a range of flat and even occasionally hopeless. That does not necessarily mean that things are really need to be we need to be alarmed. Your main level is, are they participating in the things they need to be up and going and doing? As things do loosen up, I cannot tell you enough that it is best for your teenager. If you're stuck with the choice of, well, my teenager could go and participate in this activity in school, whatever, but there's still some risk of infection. I have to, as a psychologist, throw in, besides reminding you that the infection rate of teenagers is not really a big deal, I have to really make sure and let you know that the side effects of not being out and being able to do stuff that teenagers need to be doing are significant. So if you can, and your teenager wants to, it is always better for them to be out and involved in that social skills building activity, because we will not have time today for me to get into my concern about the isolation of teenagers more and more, even before the pandemic. Teenagers need to be with their friends. They need to spend time together. They need to learn how to be social together. So that's what depression looks like, a flat kind of, hey, you won $1 million. Huh. You have to go to jail for a year. It just everything like that. That's kind of what depression looks like. Anxiety, I'm going to cover that real quick. I know this is a bit of a fire hose, but it's recorded so you can take a break, whatever. But anxiety is different. Anxiety sometimes can go along with depression, but anxiety is more when your body is lit up. It's like the adrenaline rush of just being fearful and anxious. What's important about that, and we have one of the episodes in the podcast about this, there's a difference between fear and anxiety, and I'll tell you what that is. So fear is basically when you are having certain thoughts and it gets your body lit up. Hey, there's a snake under your bed. That's going to get your body revved up because of what you're perceiving is a threat. Anxiety is not the same way. Anxiety is almost from the ground up. Your body tends to get lit up, and sometimes you can even start to try to think of things that you're fearful of that just go along with how you feel, but it's not the same. The key being is that if you have a kid that is anxious, that means that they will regularly feel sort of that fearful or adrenaline rush feeling when they know that there isn't a real direct threat. So continually reminding an anxious child, honey, there's nothing to be anxious about. You'll know everybody there. Just go ahead and go. You'll be fine, is only annoying. It doesn't help if they are chronically anxious. If you have a teenager that's been kind of anxious their whole life, shy kid, and it's very often in adolescence is the first time they really start to recognize that, hey, I think my set point is different from others. I'm a very anxious person. Then they need your help in kind of learning how to cope with something that you cannot quickly talk them out of. And frankly, one or both of their parents is very likely to be anxious as well. So coping with anxiety is not the same thing as fear, and trying to talk an anxious teenager out of their social anxiety, their whatever, by trying to remind them that there's no threat is just annoying. Anxious teenagers talk to me about that all the time. They get tired of the disrespectful and patronizing adult that is constantly telling them things they already know. Everyone likes you, you'll do fine. That doesn't help. It's more like, how's the anxiety? Did you sleep last night? Because it's worse when you haven't slept. Maybe we can, take a walk and pray together beforehand, because sometimes that helped last time. It's more like helping them to cope by walking along them with them. But again, it's important to think about that anxiety is not the same thing as fear. And again, crushing social anxiety can be really devastating for kids. And that's another reason why it's important that you really press your children to get out and be involved socially, even if it is difficult for them. Because I'm pretty concerned about how easy it is for our teenagers to spend lots of time at home on screens and claim that is satisfying. It is not. I really worry that we're losing our teenagers' ability to live in community together. And it's really important that we continually show them the value of relationships, especially a best friend, by the way. I would really encourage you to, if you don't know who your teenager's best friend is, you should ask. And if they say, I'm friends with everyone, it means that she's friends with no one. You really need to emphasize that one or two people that you love her and she loves you, that's your best friend. And try to encourage that if you can. I don't know if that's the same thing going on in Canada, probably. Down here, it's gotten worse. I have to explain to girls the value of friendships. I never had to explain friendships to girls. Always know the importance. That's what girl drama is all about, is good, social drama. But more and more, even our girls, because of we're moving a lot. Divorce means that sometimes a kid is in this house and in that house. There's just a lot more isolation. And I think it's critical that you really encourage your teenagers to have at least, listen, if you have one really good friend that you trust, then you're good. You're blessed. If you have two, it's great. If you have five, you don't have five super close friends. So see if you can try to encourage that with your kids, because that circles back the last time, I promise. I'll circle back around to social media and devices, because I think that's one of the things that you're going to have to continually try to kind of help them with, because social media creates a lot more complication in relationships. It heats up issues that, really wouldn't be such an issue. But kids are watching things online, gaining a kind of pseudo awareness of lots of things that they really don't understand. And they, at least down here in Texas, they come to school and argue with each other about politics, about sexuality and gender, about, religion, things that, they've just gotten this one-sided view, and it interferes with what they need most, which is, hey, we're all part of the same group here, and we have each other's back, and we love each other. So those are things that I think is important to, again, if you're letting go of things and you're committed to being this teenager is going to be completely an adult, then you should be able to have more and more real talks with your teenager about these things. And don't do a whole lot of lecturing to your kids. I don't care how strong you may feel about your political position, whatever that is. It is not a good age for you to spend your time lecturing to your teenager. It does not help them. You do a lot better to try to ask them about what are their thoughts about it, and really listen. It does not hurt if you have an entire conversation with your teenager and you don't finish with a lesson about something they're saying. You can just finish with, well, I thought that's kind of what you were saying. I saw your communist T-shirt and I thought, oh, I guess you're a communist. Okay. You don't panic. Just try to understand them and let them think things through themselves. and so that you can have real communication, adult to adult. Because the last thing I'll mention, because again, I hope that some of you, many of you watching are Christians. This is not an age where we can afford to send out weak, sort of immature Christian young adults that have not really thought this through for themselves, but maybe going to church because that's what my mommy and daddy say. You need to, yes, still fine for them to, you got to go to church. But at some point by their senior year, there needs to be even a point when you say, that's up to you now, because you really want to enter into a real discussion with them about, I'm glad that you like what we're doing. I think you agree with us on some of this, but you want them to be open in telling you where they don't agree, because you can't do anything. I can't tell you how many, down here in Texas, the Bible Belt, we call it. So there's still some pretty rigid, intense parenting that goes on that passes for just good Christian parenting, which means that I've had teenagers in my office that I've asked about their faith, and they say, oh, well, I don't believe in God. I said, oh, well, you're the guitar player for the worship band at your church. And he's like, oh, yeah. Don't tell my parents. They would be mad. Well, that's the weakest possible position you could be in to have any influence. If you have a teenager, this kid was 17, who was afraid to tell his parents the truth. Well, how are they possibly going to influence him in their faith? Because as you know, in Canada, because y'all are a little ahead of us, it's getting harder and harder. Christians just look weird. And so it's really important that they have the respect from parents to really be able to talk through and accept where they may differ from us, where they may have genuine questions, and so that they can be prepared to really answer for themselves, and not, like I say, some kind of extended 20-year-old child that doesn't really know how to think about these things for themselves. So that's the fire hose deal. I don't know where we are in time and so forth, but questions, I'm certainly open to that, or anything else, Creighton, that you might have thought of during the whole thing. Creighton was actually paying attention. He drifted off twice, but most of the time he was good.
It was really a good catnap, though. Like, it was a really.
He does this. He does this all the time.
No, Ken, I really appreciate that. Like you said, it's a fire hose, but thankfully, just like you say, it's all recorded. So folks at home, you guys can kind of rewind and pause when you need to, and maybe there's room for discussion there as well. There are a couple of questions I've got for you, Ken, if
Sure.
you've got time for questions.
I do.
So here's a couple of things. So one thing that you and I talked about a lot, and one thing that just had a real influence on me in my work with teenagers, is this idea of shifting our mindset from these are old children to these are young adults, and we're going to kind of connect with them on that adult-to-adult level, and for parents as well. So Ken, and as you know, that's a challenging thing to do. Like, that's not just a switch you kind of flip. So Ken, how would you respond to say the question was something like, it said that respect is earned, right? It's not just handed over. Respect is earned.
Yes.
What would you say someone said, like, similarly, freedom isn't handed over, freedom is earned? Well, how'd you respond?
Okay, that's a really good question. The basic idea of, I will give my kid more freedom when they earn it. They need to know that if you handle things, then I will be giving you over more stuff for you to handle, and you can do more of what you want to do. That is really good parenting for children. Because, and I mean it helps children to know about money. It helps them to self-control. That's how you parent children. You can keep doing some of that with adolescents, but you have to introduce freedoms that are not earned. They are yours by right, because that is where they're headed for in our culture. We have people in this country, I think you've seen, who have the right to vote, the freedom to vote, that I don't think we should have been given the freedom to vote. But nobody, you don't do that. You get it because of your age. And once they, reach these milestones, you as a parent do not have the power to say, well, you may be 19, But as far as we're concerned, you have to stay here and get home at night. The only power you have to follow through with that is if you've created a kind of anemic, dependent adult child, and that is not a good way to do it. So I am fully in favor of that kind of parenting, but it is really primarily a childhood technique. And if you keep trying to do that all the way up through adulthood, and don't keep your eye on the clock, then there's going to come a point when you look silly, when you're telling your 17-year-old that, I'm sorry, but you can't be friends with him anymore. You just look dumb. Yeah, he does. Freedoms are not something you give. They are something you recognize. You can't control it. So you have to allow that freedom.
Right. It's recognized. I love that word. Yeah. Thanks for that, Ken. So here's another question for you. Well, maybe it's not a question, but it's just asking for some more input here. I'm interested in hearing more about social interaction online versus social interaction in person, and why in person is so important, especially because many teenagers spend more time interacting with people online than in person.
Yeah, that comes up a bunch, and it worries me that we actually have to even ask that question. I talk to teenagers about this. The idea that what we're doing right now is in any way a reasonable substitute for genuine human interaction face to face. The idea that that is not obvious to everybody worries me. And it is not obvious to teenagers at all. They will tell me stories like, okay, so my girlfriend, and I said, well, did you talk to this guy? And I said, wait, or did you say this to her, or did you text this? And he'll go, well, I was texting. I said, yeah, because that's different. And they all look at me like, what? I'm like, no, if there's cues, nonverbal cues, it's just completely different when you're with each other. And it's a good question, because teenagers really think that there's really not any real difference. There really is, and genuine love cannot be developed in a two-dimensional environment. And we are social animals. Just for example, just look at what happens online. What we love is communication that's not time bound. We don't have to be even live. I can send you a message, and you can answer my message when it's convenient for you, and I'll answer yours when it's convenient for me, so that we don't actually have to time it and show enough care to even be in the same presence with each other at the same moment. That kind of casual communication creates all kinds of misunderstanding. And there's not real accepted rules about that. If I send you an email, I'm probably not going to be checking my inbox every 30 seconds wondering, why didn't you send it back? But if I send you a text, I'm not quite sure. Did your phone get turned off? People can get very concerned with the silence that actually doesn't mean anything. It's just a mess compared to real live interaction. And I'm not kidding. I mean, I'm old now, so I've been doing this for over 30 years. It worries me that the percentage of these young adults that can't look you in the eye, they don't even know how to talk face to face in a way that is, again, the foundation of being loving to each other. And so I'm not against, the kind of communication that we have, the electronic, it's a good thing, but it is absolutely no substitute for really being with other people in a real 3D, real life environment.
Yeah, right on. No, I think that's so true. There's one thing you say there, Ken, that stands out to me. It's genuine love can't be communicated in that two-dimensional environment. I just think that's so true.
Really can't.
If I can offer an observation, I think we characterize this as those teens who are always on their phones. But if I were to be honest, I think that applies to us just as much. I think it applies.
That's very true. That is very true.
Would you agree, Ken? Sounds like
totally. Yes. And we need to be careful with that. Listen, in your marriage, you need to put that thing down because husbands don't love it when their wives are on their phone, but wives really don't like their husbands on their phone, because it just communicates that I'm here in the room with you, but my soul is not here with you. And that's really painful for wives. So you need to do more than certainly sitting side by side and watching a show together. That does not count. I don't mind if you watch your show, but you really need to have time where you are, there's no device. And again, there's research that shows if you and I are sitting at a table, Creighton, and we don't know each other and we're asking each other questions, and then we're quizzed later, there will be a difference in how well we do if we were talking together and there was no phone in the environment. Was there a phone on the table? Was the phone in the other room and on? Was the phone in the other room and off? There's different levels of focus that it's like magically and invisibly draining our attention span because of these devices. And it's having a huge impact on our ability to love each other, which is really what it's all about, to be humanly connected.
Right. So again, I think it's this kind of neutral, right? It's just on and it's not a big deal. But you're right. It really does draw us in. It's like a magnet, isn't it?
Yeah. We have research that shows that over and over again.
Yeah. Well, can I throw two more questions out at
Sure.
you?
Sure.
So here's one from the chat. You've told us not to show fear, but how do we hide our true concerns or our fear for our kid and some real issues that they are not getting a grip on? They don't recognize how they're hurting themselves.
Yeah. So number one is that, again, if you're a Christian, then really it's not just an interesting idea. Prayer is a real antidote to fear. Remember that you love your teenager, but you don't love your teenager as much as Jesus loves your teenager. You're not even with your teenager right now, probably, but Jesus is. And that should bring us real comfort. And it's kind of weird how rare that brings me comfort. I'm not proud of that, but it really does demonstrate holes in my faith. So it's not just to not show the fear. I think Christians should really aim for, that's the most commanded, I think, throughout Scripture is fear not. It's all the time, over and over again. So it's not just not showing fear. It's really, we should try to push back and not be so fearful. But then secondly, I do think that it's, I wouldn't recommend that you pretend to not have any fear. Teenagers will know it. You can talk to your teenagers about, I'm just worried about this. As long as you go back to what I talked about in the advice giving, I would own it. Hey, it's me, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm really sorry, but I just have to ask you, did you fill out that application? Because I'm just worried that it's not going to happen. Whatever the thing is, it's perfectly and can be pretty effective to actually admit, hey, I'm pretty worried about this. But what you want to be careful about is taking that fear and making that into an excuse for another angry tirade where you actually think that by losing it and being scary words is actually going to accomplish a teenager walking away. I've never had a teenager that said, I was going to keep vaping, but boy, after my dad cussed me out and told me how bad it is, I've decided I'm not going to. That's just not how it works. And so if we let fear drive us toward that, then that's really where we're least effective.
Right. Ken, that's so true. You say fear not, and that biblical commandment that closely followed, I think, by remember. And so often in that context of remember all the amazing ways God has showed up for you.
That's right.
For you,
right? And I live and breathe fear. I don't want people to feel guilty that they are fearful. Me too. But I try to confess it all the time. And I certainly am not proud of it. It's something to push back against because, we all know that God has done enough that we really don't need to be fearful at all. And so it's certainly something to repent of as much as we can.
Right on. Well, Ken, there's one last question here, and this sounds like it has a little bit of family history here. So I'm just going to give it a read here. My family has a strong history of mental illness, particularly depression. In the course of an evaluation for learning challenges, my child was recently identified as being at risk of depression. What is the best next step? As a teenager, I found that the label of being depressed kind of became part of my own identity, and I'd like to avoid that for my kid. But at the same time, I want to be proactive and find her tools and help before she is in crisis. So it sounds like it's a next step kind of question.
So when you're doing an educational evaluation, you get that at-risk thing. What that usually means is that there's been a checklist that you as the parents and or your kid checked off, or even a teacher, and there are some elements of what people are observing about your kid that says that they are concerned that there's possible depression. So number one, I wouldn't make too much out of that. And number two, your family history of it isn't a primary thing to consider at this age until it gets really significant. Teenagers, as I already mentioned, go through moderate levels of depression. I mean, I think I was depressed through 7th grade the whole time. I mean, it was just gross. But I would be careful to not over-respond to your familial history until you really see significant levels of depression. I get that at-risk thing quite a lot on evaluations. So what you really want to watch for is if and when she really is not functioning, not going to the things she needs to be going to, not involving herself. There could be things that she's saying that are really kind of concerning, but mostly it's how they function. And if you're not seeing that, then you don't need to jump into some kind of treatment. But once there really is some concern, then yeah, just if you go to a psychologist or a therapist that has enough experience that they're not going to jump into doing therapy, they'll do a real evaluation. I mean, I send people home. I will tell parents that, I see what you're concerned about. I've talked with your teenager, and you don't really need therapy right now. So a good therapist that has that kind of experience can kind of help you with your own concern about, is this the time, because of my own family history, do we need to really worry about it? I would be careful that you don't need to get into all that, and certainly not talking about your family history till at least late adolescence, because it's not really that relevant. Adolescence is a unique stage of its own, that knowing that, like my grandmother was extremely depressed, if you had told me that, well, I already knew it, but knowing that when I was a teenager, it didn't really make any difference. Teenagers are just trying to get through. They're not, examining my family biology and how it's affecting my behavior. So that's just not something that's relevant at their age.
And I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And this has just been great, and it's been a lot, but it's been really good. And
yeah, good.
I want to encourage folks to play that back, and I just want to say thanks. So, I shared your website, drwilgus.com. We talked with the Feeding the Mouth That Bites You podcast. There's a link for your book, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, below in the description there for Canadian Amazon, for us Canadians. And, Ken, is there any other ways folks can follow you online, or any resources you'd want to recommend?
Those are mostly it. Feedingthemouth.com is another website that probably needs to be updated. But yeah, that's mostly where I am. You can find me at drwilgus.com. That's mostly if you look at, if you just Google my name, there's, some other interviews that might be of interest, but mainly I just like to get that information out. The planned emancipation, the Feeding the Mouth sort of message is very important to me. And so if I can be of help in getting that out to people, I really want to do that.
Right on. Thanks, Ken. So you can find a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel where you are right now. This will also be on our website, newsongportperry.ca, in our children and families section for future reference for folks at home. You can follow New Song Port Perry on Instagram and like us on Facebook for more information on upcoming events for families, children, and youth, including New Song Art Fest, where I'm told local artists will lead us in creating our own painted works of art. There'll be 3 different outdoor sessions for the weekend of August 7 to 8 for kids, teenagers, and adults, respectively. More details are to follow, so be sure to sign up for our email newsletter and follow us on social media there. And that sounds like a great way to unplug a little bit and have some fun together. All right, all that being said, I think it's time for our draw here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull names from a basket. I've even got a basket for us this evening. How do you think about that, Ken?
It looks very clerical in some way.
I think so, in some way. Yeah, that's the vibe we're going for, right? All right, here's our names here. So I've got Leslie L. from Port Perry, Heather W. from Port Perry, and Elise B. from Ottawa, Ontario. So you can expect us to get in touch with you shortly here, and we'll make sure that that you get your copy of Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. And for folks at home, you guys can find that on Amazon or wherever else books are sold. Where else do we buy books these days? I'm just buying them on Amazon.
All Amazon now.
I think so, right? Ken, thank you so much once again for joining us.
You bet. Great and good to see you.
Good to see you too, Ken. God bless you, and take care and have a good night, folks at home.
Thanks.